Hello.
Hello, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Okay, so Kirsten just texted me and said that you mentioned something about worksheets, but on my end, I don't have your PowerPoint or your worksheets. Can
Okay.
you send those to me?
Yep, I can. I sent them to Kirsten.
Oh, you know what? It might be she ended up having to leave work today to go help her mom out with a medical procedure. So maybe I bet she just missed them before she left.
Yep, no problem. I'll forward them to you.
Awesome.
Yeah. So any feedback from the last session?
Let me look at the surveys. I can
Where
pull
am I
them up
going?
right now.
Cool. And did you have a good vacation?
I did. I'm trying to think oh, okay. So I'm actually going to Montana this weekend.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I was like, was I out last week? My days are all so confused in my head. I'm like,
No,
yeah,
that's right.
possibly I was out last week and I don't remember.
Yeah.
That's possible. Maybe I was mentally checked out. That's possible as well. Okay, let's see. I'm looking at the survey responses. The first question is just how did you view the webinar? So live. So 35% of respondents said they learned their knowledge of dynamics that cause and maintain poverty improved to a great extent, and then 46% said to a moderate extent.
Nice.
And then the rest was like 13% minimal, and then 4% not at all, which was like 5 people. So the majority either felt their knowledge increased to a moderate or great extent. And then the vast majority, so about 90%, said that they rated their understanding of the materials as excellent or good.
Good. Okay.
You got, overwhelmingly positive feedback on format, pace, facilitation, and presenter. Everything,
Okay.
you were well over majority excellent and good.
Okay, good. Good, good.
Let's see if there were any.
It's so hard when I can't see their faces.
I know. Let's see here. 89% said their expectations were met for the webinar.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm seeing what some of the typed responses were. It was, what barriers have you encountered or expect to encounter regarding this content? And one person said, we're in Ohio. So, I mean, I guess that is a barrier.
Yep. Yeah. Especially when I presented Illinois data.
I'm also from Michigan, so I'm just trained to not like Ohio. So it's just like in my DNA that I can't like Ohio. So that does sound like a barrier to me as a Michigander.
Sure.
The other one was, I'm new in my current position. So a lot of these are like none, waiting to view part 2. It's not a lot of feedback.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah,
so
cool.
I'm looking at to see if there's any unanswered questions, to see if there's anything. Let's see here.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, I mean, people said no and then yes, but they didn't say what the question was. So nothing crazy in the survey.
Okay, good, good, good. Cool. Thank you. That was my assumptions based on the comment boxes, but I wanted to just follow up and see if there was anything from the surveys that came out. So
perfect. Okay, so I'm looking at the email you just sent me. Great. Okay, so
now normally I have 2 screens and I can run with my comment box, but the problem I had last time was my comment box got behind my Zoom screen and then I couldn't see it. And so that was when I was sharing my screen. So do you mind sharing again?
no,
and then
not
rolling
at all.
through that? Okay.
Yeah, no,
It's
no.
awkward for me to say next slide, but I think I would rather get the comments and do that than.
Oh, it's totally fine, because that's, I just had another one of these webinars this morning and it was the same thing. So it's, people are used to advanced slide. They're used to
Okay.
it.
I'm old school. And so I'm used to the film strips where it would go beep, and I could do that too, which would make those of us that are older laugh, but I don't think the younger generation will get it at all.
That's so funny. I mean, you know what?
Moment.
Yep, I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. Okay, so welcome everyone to this WIOA Wednesday webinar. My name is Molly Cook with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be the moderator for technology today. And today we'll be talking about Bridges Out of Poverty, take session 2. So as a reminder, all participants are on the call in listen-only mode. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post your questions in the Q&A or chat box, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. A reminder that this webinar will be recorded, and the presentation, recording, and any materials presented during today's meeting will be available on the icsps.illinoisstate.edu website and on Illinois WorkNet within 48 hours. And I will put a link to those in the chat. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will offer closed captioning as well. And the recorded session will also have closed captioning. At the end of the webinar and tomorrow, each attendee will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking you about the webinar. Please provide feedback and any suggestions you have to help improve our upcoming webinars. That is super helpful. And finally, if you have a faulty internet connection or would prefer to call in, you can do so by calling into this webinar using the phone number in your original presentation registration email. And with that, I want to start with our 2 WIOA Wednesday webinar polling questions that we always start with. So our first poll is, which partner do you represent? I'll give you about 10 more seconds to type in your answers. I also want to note while you're working on this that our presenter noted that you will need something to write with and write on during our session today. There'll be an activity where you can write down some notes. So as you're settling in, grab something to write on and with. Okay,
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah, no problem. So looking at what partners we all represent, it looks like we have all of the partners present, as well as other WIOA partners and stakeholders and state and local workforce innovation board. So welcome to everyone. Then I want to launch our second poll question, which is, oops, you know what? I did this in the wrong order and I didn't even notice. Okay, pretend that didn't happen. So now I'm going to ask you the question that was actually displayed, which is, what is your local area? So I'm going to launch that poll right now and give you about 20 seconds to answer that. All right, we'll do about 10 more seconds looking at your responses. And it looks like we have Laura noted that she's from Southeastern Ohio. So we have Ohio representation present as well. Thank you for sharing, Laura. So where is your local area? And it looks like we have all areas of the state: Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, Southern, and statewide. I'm also seeing in the chat, we have quite a few from Ohio. That's awesome. We have someone from Washington, Bowling Green, a lot of Ohio. Awesome. So the more the merrier. This is great. And with this, I'd love to present it or pass it to our presenter, Melissa Martin, to take us through Bridges Out of Poverty session 2.
Wonderful. Thank you, Molly, and welcome everybody from Illinois and Ohio. I appreciate you all being here today. If you had a chance to join last week, we started with session 1. This is the third, or there's 3 parts to this series. We did one last week and we're doing session 2 today. And then next week we'll do session 3. If you want to advance the slide, Molly, and then go again. Laura, I see in the chat that you are asking for a handout. Great, Molly, if you want to stay there, that'd be good. Yes, there will be handouts, and I've invited Molly to make the PowerPoint available to you. There's lots of good information in here. I know it's hard to catch everything, so you're welcome to that. I've also put notes in the notes section of the PowerPoint, and you're welcome to go through. There's video links and other information that if you are interested. So last week, we talked about the mental models for each social class, how perceptions shape actions. Today, we're going to be talking about the research centered around poverty, as well as some hidden rules that exist in the 3 socioeconomic classes. There will be a couple other handouts, and Molly will make those available when we get there. Next week is more the practical application. So there's a lot of information that is being thrown out, and I teach credit and non-credit classes, and I love my credit classes because it's a lot of theory and ideas, and that's amazing. Dr. Ruby Payne, I mentioned last week, developed the Bridges Out of Poverty curriculum, and I'm so thankful, and it is a lot of good theories. Theories are great. One thing I like about my non-credit classes like this is you guys get to do the hard work of putting the theories into practice. And I'll let Molly answer the question about the PowerPoint from before, and then you guys can kind of work that out. So I encourage you to come next week so that we can begin to put that into practice. What are you going to do with it? Okay, now you can go to the next slide, Molly. So last week we did talk about think about where do you have the most influence, and I know that you come from all over several states and you are doing wonderful, amazing work. Where do you have the most influence? Is it in all 4 of these lenses? Do you work with individuals in poverty? Does your institution work with individuals in poverty? What does your community do or not do to remove or maybe put up barriers for those that are in poverty? And what policies exist that maybe help or hinder those that are working to move out of poverty? So just a recap into what we talked about last week. And I want to remind you of, if you want to do all of those great things in all those 4 lenses, wonderful. However, where do you have the most influence? And remember that we talked about where you tend to spend your time determines your knowledge base, which is a powerful statement. Who are you around? How do they influence you? How do you influence them? And how do you expand your knowledge base? Your knowledge base influences and drives your mental model. And we talked about those different circles that we did. What is the mental model of somebody living in poverty, somebody living in middle class, somebody living in wealth? And for dialogue to occur, if you want to truly reach people, you got to set your mental model aside and recognize their mental model. And that's also powerful. And how do I remove some of those judgments or biases that I have out of the way, and then be able to listen and to hear somebody else's story and understand where they're coming from. We also talked about tyranny of the moment. So as we unraveled the mental model around those living in poverty, that was something that was very strong, and we will come back again to that today. The tyranny of the moment is, I live in the now. I don't have the luxury of thinking about the future. If I have money coming in, how do I deal with that? What is the crisis of the moment that I need to work through? It is living in the now. The rest of that statement is the need to act overwhelms any willingness people have to learn. And you can go back for more, if you missed the first session, more information on these. But these are the 4 takeaways that I wanted to remind you of as we move into this next section. Okay, next slide. So what I want to do is I want to start off with some of the research. So this is where you're going to need your piece of paper and something to write with. And next slide, what I want you to do is I want you to create a list of everything that you think causes poverty in the United States. And then it says choose 1 or 2 causes from your list, share them with the group in the chat. So first, just do some brainstorming, write down everything you came up with. Not that, there you go, just stay there. So what causes poverty in the US? Go. I'll give you, I like Molly's 20 seconds, and then go ahead and start sharing them in the chat. Okay, so keep making your own list on your piece of paper, but then also start adding stuff to the chat would be awesome. Broken families, low wages, systemic racism, unemployment, lack of resources, generational habits, great. They're piling in death of a family member, good one. Lack of equal opportunity, lack of education, disabilities, family history, government, medical issues, wonderful answers. Yes, thank you. Robots taking over manufacturing and now driving positions, greed, mental health issues, lack of education. Wonderful, excellent answers. Thank you, thank you. Limited beliefs, low wages, addiction, redlining, lack of childcare and transportation, lack of resources. Wonderful, thank you. And you're welcome to keep adding to this. Molly, if you want to go to the next slide. So Dr. Payne's research came up with, there are 4 main categories of what causes poverty in the US. And it is, one of them is behaviors of the individual. So think about from your list, what would fit that category? And I'm thinking of things like, when I saw addiction, what else do I see in here that would fall in there? Greed, behaviors of the individual, and still disability. I don't know if that's a behavior, if we want to tie that to that. Bad choices, bankruptcy. So think about some of the things that come into there. The other one is the absence of human and social capital within the community. And if you had a chance to go back and think about what we talked last week, remember our conversation around transportation. Or conversation around, if I get stopped, if I run a red light, then what is that going to do to my budget or my understanding? But somebody who doesn't have the resources, or there's some race discrimination going on, if the community is going to put up barriers, are your services and agencies open when people need them to be open? Some of those things will come into play. What you wrote in your chat that would fit in there would be lack of resources, lack of education or access to good education, low wages may come into there. Think about what does your community do that helps people not move out of poverty or help people stay in poverty. The next one, the third one, is human exploitation. So things that we talked about last time, that is like used car lots, some landlords, trying to think of others, rent to own stores, check cashing services. We talked about Dollar General or dollar stores that may capitalize on people not having enough resources. And the last one, cost of healthcare, good one. I would say that that could fit in the absence of human and social capital within the community. And you can align that in different areas if you would like. The last one, political and economic structures. If you had a chance to watch the Adams County wage gap video that I recommended you watch after the last session, we ran out of time and didn't have time to watch it. But how many of you know that video talks about this woman who wants to get ahead, but if she gets a raise, then that will limit her spending capital. So if you give me a raise and I won't qualify for these services, and then I will have to pay for that. So my spending income will be decreased because I got a raise. And the video did a much better job of explaining it than I did. And so think about what policies exist in that environment. If you go to the next slide, Molly. So here is, and this is out of the Bridges Out of Poverty book, and look at where the 4 categories are listed across the top. It gives you a definition, and then it gives you an example. So link what you have written on your piece of paper and think about how do these fit these different definitions. For example, when we're talking about individual behaviors and circumstances, here are examples. Racism, discrimination, dropping out, lack of education, alcoholism, teen pregnancies, work ethic, lack of organizational skills. So that's one aspect of what causes poverty in the US. Note that racism and discrimination hit every category, all 4 categories. We are seeing that that is very much a part of the research centered around the causes of poverty. Note examples around community conditions, middle-class flight, plant closings, charity that leads to dependency, downward pressure on raises, layoffs, and city and regional planning. So not around the individual, but where does the individual live? The next one, exploitation. Again, racism, discrimination, payday lenders, sweatshops, human trafficking, some landlords, internet scams, drug trade, day labor. How do we exploit the poor? And then the last one, political and economic structures, racism, discrimination, bursting bubbles, stagnant wages, insecure pensions, minimum wage, living wage, self-sufficient wage, decline in unions, declining middle class. Yes. So all of those influence what causes racism or what causes poverty in the US. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to go back to the piece of paper that you had, and I want you to number these 1 through 4. So if what you wrote down is individual behaviors and circumstances, then put a 1. If it is around a community condition, what you wrote, put a 2. Is it around exploitation? Put a 3. And if it's around 4 political economic structures, put a 4. So take a few minutes, okay, like another 20 seconds, and then indicate where they fall. And this is explained on the next slide. Molly, can you advance to the next slide? And yes, I can see the slides. I see in the caption, in the chat, that some of you are having issues seeing the slides. I'm not sure why that is. Molly's back there figuring it out. Some of you have jumped to part 2. Thank you. So write down what you're comfortable sharing. So put, where do you find the greatest number? When I innocently asked what causes poverty in the US, you wrote down a list and then you've numbered them. What section had the most numbers for you? Do you mainly have things, I see some people are like 2 and 4, a lot of 2s, many 1s, right? So where does your greatest number fall? Nice, thank you. And there's no wrong answer. If you go to the next slide, Molly, thank you everybody for sharing that part. And I know that people get worried when we're going to talk about politics, but I'm of the mindset if we don't talk about things, we're going to continue to be divided. So I like that AHA Process put this slide in their slide deck. So what this says is that the political right mainly, and of course, this is an overgeneralization, not everyone, but the political right mainly thinks that what causes poverty in the US are individual behaviors and lack of jobs. Well, if they would just work harder, or if we just had more jobs, or if they would do this, right? So it's that kind of language that I hear coming from the political right. The political left believes what causes poverty in the US, exploitation and racism, and government policies. So if we would address those things, then we wouldn't have as much poverty in the US. Here's what's important to remember. All four cause poverty in the US. And as we flip back and forth between different political parties and their leadership, we are only ever addressing half of the issue. We need to work to address the whole issue and work together. Go back again to where do you have the most influence? Is it with the individual? Is it with the institution that you're a part of? Is it in a community? Or is it policies? And I would invite all of us have influence into policies, whether we are the decision makers in our company or in the community, but we also have the ability to use our voice. We need to address all 4 areas in order to address poverty in the US. So take this to heart, because we're going to need to be able to work together, not only politically, but in different socioeconomic status levels, as well as a whole other gambit of differences that we have been talking about. We're going to need to come together and address this issue for everybody to succeed. Okay, next slide. So this slide, and I invite you to obtain the book, Bridges Out of Poverty, either the textbook version or the workshop version. And I also, Molly has a copy of this that she's going to put in the chat for you. So this is talking about the Bridges constructs, and they are key concepts that underline the knowledge base from Bridges Out of Poverty and AHA process. So if you want to move to the next slide, and Molly, can you put that handout in the chat would be good. And you don't need that handout for this workshop, but I want you to have it so that you can use it in your institutions or your organizations, or even with your friends and family members. It's a good way to talk about the information. Thank you, Molly. So the 10 constructs around Bridges Out of Poverty and the models and the lessons that are put here is: 1 is to use the lens of socioeconomic class to understand and take responsibility for your own societal experience while being open to the experience of others. So that's a big sentence, a long sentence to talk about what we talked about in the last class. So what are the mental models of people in poverty, of people in middle class, of people in wealth? And how do you begin to meet people where they're at rather than judging them where they're at? What I like about these constructs, and if you have the copy to the published material, is that they break these up. Can you do this as an individual? Well, you're here, and that's the first step. So thank you very much for that. But then also look at your institution. Does your institution do this? Does your community do this? And do your policymakers do this? It's a way to begin to move the needle, because you as an individual may be on it and may be like, yep, got it, do it. But if you never share it with anybody, if you never talk about it, then your institution or your organization might not understand this. So it's a way to assess where you're at, as well as those other 4 lenses. Tara put it in the chat. The author of the book is Dr. Ruby Payne, and the book is called Bridges Out of Poverty. And I can give you, oh, actually, I think it's on the bottom there. I can give you a citation if you would like for the book. So number 2, think about, of those 4 lenses, again, individual, institution, community, and policymakers, at the intersections of poverty with other social disparities, such like race, gender, physical ability, age, etc. Can you address inequalities and access to resources? Can you define poverty as to the extent to which a person, institution, or community does without resources? And you might be able to do this individual, but what does your community do? And are they ready to understand or to apply this information? Do you build relationships and mutual respect? Do you base plans on the premise that people in all classes, sectors, and political persuasions are problem solvers and need to be at the decision-making table? Or is one group trying to swim upstream? Do you base plans on accurate mental models of poverty, middle class, and wealth, or do you look at it through only one lens? And remember I said last week that most of the people in workplace, religious institutions, educational institutions come at life from a middle class mental model, and they come up with plans according to their mental model, and they forget to think that other people may think of things differently. That's an important conversation to have. At the individual, institution, and community and policy levels, do you stabilize the environment, remove barriers to transition, and build resources? Do you address all causes of poverty, those 4 areas of research that we just talked about? Does your institution or agency or organization have the ability to do that, or do you need to partner with somebody so that all causes of poverty are addressed? Or is your community missing a part? And then that's hindering the advancement or people working through getting ahead. Do you build long-term support for individual, institutional, and community policy transitions? And do you build economically sustainable communities in which everyone can live well? I went through these very fast. This is a big conversation. And what I would invite you to do is to take the handout that Molly put in the chat, go back to your staff meetings and say, let's look at this. Where do you personally stand? And I know that can be a hard conversation for people. Where do they personally stand? And where does your institution or organization stand? And which of these do you need to work on? It's a great tool to assess and then create goals around to move forward. And if anybody needs help or wants information about doing this with their staff meeting, please reach out, because this can be a difficult conversation for some agencies or individuals, but very vital to moving the needle. If you go to the next slide, the next 3 slides, Molly, you will see this is what I was talking about. So here is a example of what you could do. You can, in your staff meeting, say, okay, can we define poverty as the extent to which a person, institution, or community does without resources? I'm looking at number 3. Can you do it as an individual? Yeah, probably. Can you do it as an institution? Maybe. Community, not so much. And I don't even know what the policymakers are doing, right? It's a good way to assess, like I said before, to go forward. And these next 3 slides. So when you get this PowerPoint, then you have this template that you could use in your staff meeting and work through that. Okay, if you want to go to one more. So where I want to spend probably the rest of our time together today is I want to talk about hidden rules. And this is what is actually brought me into the curriculum, Bridges Out of Poverty. I was working on my master's degree and somebody handed me this book and I was like, oh, it was groundbreaking for me. I thought, why am I this old and just now learning about this? So fascinating stuff for me as a social scientist. I hope you find it interesting too. In the chat, what I would like you to do is what's written on the next slide. So what rules exist in your workplace break room? They are typically not written down. What rules exist in your workplace break room? Go. Clean up after yourself. Where you sit. Don't eat other people's food. Don't steal other people's food. Clean out the microwave after you use it. Ooh, be quiet. That's a good one. Unplug the toaster oven. That's a good one. Don't cook fish. The other one is popcorn, right? Or don't burn the popcorn. Talk in a quiet voice. Turn off the coffee. Wipe up any sticky messes. Don't make smelly food. Don't stay too long. If you don't wash dishes, they get thrown away. Take your leftovers home. Don't let them grow things there. Reset the microwave timer after use. These are great rules. I love it. Put your dishes away. Don't have phone conversations in there, going back for the ones I missed. Initial everything you put in the refrigerator. Good one. Yes, nice. These are great. Return back to work on time. Due to COVID, limit the people in the room. Upper management should not, in capital letters, eat in the break room. Even if you do not have a separate office, you're not invited. Bring your own coffee creamer. Don't take the free sugar. If you empty the coffee pot, make more coffee, refill the ice cube tray. Don't yell, use your inside voice. Refill the paper in the copy machine. Excellent, nice. Okay, so I had asked that you put in rules that were not written down. So go back to the chat and tell me, how did you know you broke these rules? Like, it's not in the employee manual. Nobody showed up and said, okay, this is what you need to do. Or maybe they did, but typically, how did you learn that you broke one of these rules? Note on the fridge. Coworker was like, hey, somebody told you, getting a side eye from a veteran employee. Nice, snide comment. Everybody kind of looked at you weird. I'm interpreting. There was a note. I love the note, that the little snotty little sign that says, your mother doesn't live here, clean up after yourself, blah, blah, blah. Oh, emails to the whole staff. You weren't even singled out. They just like blanket. Nice. Heard your coworkers gossiping. Okay, these are great answers because they tie right into what we're going to talk about next, which are hidden rules. So this is something that we can relate to because we typically have some sort of break room or lunchroom type area, and nobody really tells us about it. We learn we're breaking the rules typically by either somebody pulling us aside and saying, this is what's going on, or we feel it. We get a side eye. We like are uncomfortable, like we don't know what's going on. I was working with a group, and their big rule that they finally just had to make it known to everybody was that some people, they had a ice machine and they had a scoop. Well, somebody would use the ice machine scoop and scoop the ice into their glass and then just throw the ice scoop back on top of the ice. And that blew some of their minds. They had a holder for the scoop, and you were supposed to put it in the holder because germs. But some people were like, whatever, it's just ice, and they threw it back in there. And some people were highly offended. And this became a big bone of contention in that workplace that they just didn't talk about. Everybody was just kind of like, oh my gosh, oh no. And then it became really uncomfortable until they named it, and they went like, okay, this is what we need to do here. And this is why. So think about, how do you feel? And what is your mental model? And where are you going with that? So you don't really know how you screwed up or what's going on. But you feel it, and then when you get the nastygram from administration, then you're kind of like, oh, that's what's going on. Nominated, I love this one, Lori, nominated by the rest of the staff to talk to the offender. Like, you get to go tell them what's going on. And it's a big thing. Okay, so Molly, if you can move to the next slide. All right, so when it comes to hidden rules of different socioeconomic classes, Dr. Payne's research came up with, in poverty, these are some of the hidden rules around these categories, in middle class and then in wealth. So I won't go through them all, through all of them, but I do want to hit several of them because if you grew up in a category and you're still in that category, it feels like, oh, thank you, Molly. The worksheet is in, or the handout of this is in the chat if you want to obtain it. So if you haven't been exposed to the other classes, then you think that they're from another planet. You're like, why would you do that? But in their world, that's the rule. And think about what happens if you break that rule. People kind of look at you weird, like, I don't know. Okay, so let me go through some of these and explain further. We already talked about money. So in the last class, we talked about the attitude around money, if you're living in poverty, is when you get it, you spend it, right? You are solving all your past wants. Like, I wish I could have bought my kid those cool tennis shoes they wanted. And so you are thinking about all of the past things. And when you have money, you can solve those past wants, right? If you, or you're solving the crisis of the moment, right? I think I told you that my sister would say, okay, I wonder who gets my money today when she didn't have money, the water bill, or should I pay the electric bill, right? Who gets my money right now? And I have money, and so I can pay one. This one sent me 2 collection notices. This one sent me 3 collection notices. I guess this one gets my money. So you're either solving the past or the present. Remember, we talked earlier about the tyranny of the moment. In middle class, work very hard to manage our money. How many of you did the Stephen Covey envelope model, right? Or maybe still do, right? This is my entertainment money, this is my rent money, this is my food money, and I can't mix up the envelopes, otherwise I won't have money for rent, right? And then we take it to a higher level, the more money we get, and now we're putting into this account or to that investment or this bank account or savings, vacation save, right? So we kind of manage it. We spend a lot of energy making sure they fit in the right bucket. For wealth, very conservative. You invest it, you live off the interest, you make sure that your status quo can be maintained, and you have people that can help you do that, resources. Okay, who mainly plays the lottery? People in poverty. And what happens when they win? They get it, they spend it. And remember, friends and family are a resource. We talked about that last class. And what are they going to do? They're going to share the wealth. And in my white middle class judgy brain, I'm like, what are you, crazy? Why'd you buy crazy Uncle Steve a car? You could have used that money to pay for rent for the next several months. Like, what are you doing? And what are they doing is they are living in the moment, and their friends and family, remember, stone soup, we share. And so we come at, when we get money, dealing with it in very different ways. Think about attitudes around stimulus checks and the judgment that comes in on what people are doing with them. And remember, I said the other groups think the other two groups are absolutely bonkers. Like, why would you do that? Move to social emphasis. We talked about this last class as well. Inclusion. Those in poverty, social inclusion of the people they like, or if they are have resources. So we talked about Uncle Steve living on the couch, not really an uncle biologically, not really related to anybody, but I like him. He's kind of funny, especially when he's sober, so that's great. So it's inclusivity. Move to wealth. On the other side, emphasis on social exclusion. It is about connections. So you have to be the right kind of person in order to talk to me. Middle class, it's not about people at all. It's about emphasis on self-governance and self-sufficiency. I can do it myself. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. Aren't I cool? And our friends and family are important to us, but they're secondary to achievement. And we talked a little bit that before. If you take a second and read Barbara's chat, people in different classes have developed different social norms. Yes, it's exactly what this is talking about. Norms provide us with specific ways to behave. But if you're not within that class, it makes it extremely difficult for those who want to move forward to adjust. And they may not be able to. And we're going to come back to that comment. Barbara, I'm so glad you put that in because it's a powerful statement and we're going to come back to it here in a minute. So hold on to that. Okay, the next category is food. So I spent a little bit of time on this one, mainly because it's fascinating to me when it comes around food habits, food insecurities, food behaviors. And this is what actually got me into the curriculum. So I'm working on my master's program. It's around food and communication, because if you want people to talk, bring food. And I interviewed my family members about food habits they had when they were growing up. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so if you look at those in poverty, the key question is, did you have enough? Quantity is very important. So if you take my dad's family, my dad is the oldest of 7, and I had talked about this in the last class, and my grandfather was a construction worker, and he supported his family of 9, kind of. So he would go to construction sites and he'd send money home, and my grandmother was a fantastic cook, and she was able to feed herself, grandpa when he was home, and a family of 7 on very little money. Now my dad, he was the oldest, and he hated shredded wheat because grandma would buy a big bag of the non-name brand shredded wheat, and he did not like it because it just got bigger in his stomach and he hated it. But what I did is I came along and I interviewed, my dad has passed, I interviewed the 6 remaining siblings, and I asked them, what was your favorite thing that grandma cooked when you were growing up? 5 out of the 6. Not the youngest, because he had another idea. And then they turned on him and they complained about him. But anyway, no judgment. All family has things. But 5 out of the 6 independently said, we love grandma's ham and beans. Now, grandma has taught me how to make ham and beans, only I use actual ham in my ham and beans. Grandma didn't often have the luxury of ham. She'd use the ham bone or the salt pork or bacon grease or something. They were ham flavored beans. But the kids knew that when grandma made ham and beans, that's the day they would get enough. And my dad was 6'6", very tall, and hungry all the time, growing boys. And he knew that that was the day that he could get full. So he loved ham and beans. Quantity. Grandma would buy a big bag of pintos, boil them down, cook them, make this wonderful ham and beans, ham flavored beans, and the kids loved it. Now, and Sherry said something that just blew my mind. And she went, oh, wait. I also liked when I got to be the chosen child to lick the A1 sauce off of Grandpa's T-bone steak. Okay, let's just unpack that statement for a minute. Wait, what, Aunt Sherry? what did I learn about my family looking at food habits? So I learned that grandma's fixing actually 2 dinners, ham and beans for everybody. Grandpa got T-bone steak. And if you were the chosen child, then you got to lick the A1 sauce off the T-bone steak. Didn't get the steak, but got to lick the A1 sauce. So you can see some of the patterns of behavior and the influence of food and food habits coming out through my family. The excellent comment about Hamburger Helper was a poor man's meal until you nickel and dime. Excellent book. If you have a chance to read that, find that. Yeah, lots of Hamburger Helper because you can do a lot with Hamburger Helper and it helps it. Yes, great comment. Here's what the youngest said. So Uncle John said something that was very interesting that backs up what Barbara said a minute ago. So Uncle John said, oh, I didn't like ham and beans. And then the other kids turned on him. The other siblings were like, well, you ate it. And then he said, well, what else was I going to eat, right? There was nothing else, so I had to eat it, right? But he's learned, he went to college, brilliant man, very smart and did very well, does very well. And he said, I didn't like ham and beans. But that wasn't really true. Well, maybe it was. But here's what he told me next that I thought was interesting, which backs up Barbara's comment. He learned when he went to college, if he ordered pinto beans, that's poor people food. But if he ordered black beans, then that was good. If he ordered fried chicken, poor people food. If he ordered baked chicken, then that was cool. If he ordered canned veggies or no veggies, poor. If he ordered fresh vegetables or fancy lettuce like arugula and spring mix and beyond iceberg, fancy. So he knew that what he ordered and what he ate told people his socioeconomic class. Now he's the youngest of 7 kids, an observer, smart kid to watch and figure out what do I need to do to fit in. I like Safia's comment in the chat. Where you spend your time determines your knowledge base. And if you are only eating no vegetables or canned vegetables, what does that do to the socioeconomic determinants of health, which we talked about last class? But then also socially, what does that do? So I want you to assess your last potluck, probably pre-COVID, because potlucks are a thing. And how do people behave? Think of these different socioeconomic classes, and somebody in poverty are going to be like, hot dang, we're going to load up our plate, quantity. And then what is the hidden rule? What's the etiquette of a potluck? And does that person get the side eye? Have there been judgments made about, well, they're eating a lot and they only brought a bag of chips? You got to release yourself from those mental models of judgment and accept people where they are at. Move to middle class when it comes around food. When it comes around food, it's not about quantity, it's more about quality. Did you like it? Starbucks has made a bazillion-dollar industry on this concept alone. You want half calf, no calf, decaf, low calf, medium, I don't know all the calves. Whole milk, almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk, oat milk, skim milk, non-fat milk, right? So many different kinds of milk. What do you like? Have you ever been to Starbucks or your favorite coffee shop and they are mixing up your drink and you're like, I don't know, give me something new to try. And then they're like, do you like it? And you're like, it's okay. They like snatch that out of your hand and throw it in the trash and mix you up something else. And you're like, that was a $5 drink. What are you doing? But it is about, did you like it? How many people do you know go to their kids and say, okay, 3-year-old child, what would you like? Would you like chicken nuggets or would you like pizza rolls for dinner? What do you like? Growing up in my house, remember, we bring the generational habits of which we were raised. So my dad brought his poverty mentality into raising us. And I was never allowed. What did I like? Never entered our conversation. Your mom made it, you will eat it, and you will eat all of it. Because historical trauma, he took that idea of being hungry with him, and then he passed it on to, you are lucky enough to have food, you should enjoy it and you should eat it. Did he suspend his mental model? No. Did I blame him for it? No. But think about how it's so common for him and for somebody in middle class, so common for them. Okay, move to wealth mentality. Not about sustenance at all. It's not about being able to eat to survive. They have enough resources to survive. That's why it's on. Was it presented well? How was it plated? Presentation is more important. So that's why when you go to a really fancy restaurant, you get the piece of beef that's this big and you get that ding, pretty dinner. And me growing up with food habits from somebody who grew up in poverty and being middle class now, I go, what the heck is this? This is a hockey puck. It's an appetizer. Where's dinner? I should have eaten before I come. So in a really fancy restaurant, I'm kind of a bull in the china shop, and I need to pay attention to the hidden rules there of what's important in order to fit in. And how did I learn that? By getting the side eye. Like, what, why are you throwing a fuss? Like, no, you should be thankful. Look at how well they plated that. Every group judges the other two groups, and we don't talk about them. They're hidden rules. So think about, even around the attitude of food, how do these hidden rules connect us or divide us? You need to suspend your mental model in order to meet people where they're at. So I want to take this concept of food, and thank you for letting me share my story. And I want to move to, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. So let's move to destiny and language. And we're going to talk more about language in the next class next week. But I want to fold it in and give you a little highlight now. So when it comes to language and food, then we'll do destiny and time and go from there. When it comes to language, think about language is about survival. And so my grandmother was a great cook. I think they tried to open a restaurant at one point, but it didn't take. She was really good at providing for and taking care of her family and her food turning out well. But the dinner table was crazy. Language is about survival. It's about connection. We'll talk more about this next time, but it is about the relationships. Think of you and your friend hanging out, right? And we'll come back around to this again. It is a crazy table, and you can imagine with 7 kids all hungry, and how fun that was. And I love grandma's table because it was just a hoot to hang out with, the laughter and all of things. But it is about survival and connection. With middle class, the language is more about negotiation. Well, I don't want chicken nuggets. Okay, well, do you want pizza rolls? Well, maybe, but can I have this or this, right? It's that negotiation. Think about how their dinner time conversations are going to go. And then around language, think about networking with wealth and the formal register. Think of a stereotypical wealthy family sitting at dinner, and it's just like, very business, or it's not the same table as somebody in poverty. Move to destiny, fate. People in poverty believe in fate. Look, I can't do much to mitigate chance or change because things just happen. Like, who saw that coming? What's going on? With middle class, it's all about choice. And we instill that at a very young age. Do you want chicken nuggets or pizza rolls? And your choices are going to have future ramifications. From a very young age, the middle class are training their kids to think about the future and to sacrifice today for the future. For wealth, destiny is n'oblige oblige, which is the inferred responsibility to give back. So how many of you can name some of the named buildings in your community? We have the Hathaway building, and we have the Hanson building, and we have this, right? It is that responsibility that I need to give back to my community, but I'm going to do it in a way that protects my family name. If you don't, and we'll talk more about this next week, I'm jumping ahead, but if you aren't given that ability to learn how to take responsibility for your own thoughts and your own language and your choices, is that going to hinder you in the long run? Maybe. I know when it comes to destiny, that I have enough of my dad's upbringing in me that I could survive the zombie apocalypse for a short period of time. I think I said this last week, right? I know I can get fresh water out of the tank of the toilet, not the bowl. That's gross. Don't do that. Out of the tank of the toilet that I could that I could survive. My kids, however, I raised them very middle class. If the zombie apocalypse were to hit, as soon as the Wi-Fi went down, they'd be sunk. They'd be like, I don't even know what to do anymore. So there are some benefits to each of the social classes, but you got to get out of your own way to listen and to hear what they are. Okay, let's move to time, which we've already talked about. Time for those in poverty, the tyranny of the moment. They live in the now. Decisions are made for the moment based on feelings or survival. For middle class, the future is most important. Decisions are made against future ramifications. And how many people, those of you that grew up in middle class, were told, you need to make good choices now. You need to get good grades in high school so you can get a scholarship, so you can go to school. If you don't get to the scholarship, then you're great. So it is about sacrifice for the future. With wealth, traditions and history are most important. Decisions are made partially on the basis of tradition and decorum. And what I find with wealth, it is not an individualistic as much as some of the other society, it is more collectivistic because you will sacrifice your individuality for the family name, which in my white middle class judgy brain, I go, why doesn't she leave him? We know he's cheating on her. Well, she can't, because then that would mess with the family image. And it's not about her, it's about the family image. And look at how I get a little judgmental about that. And I don't understand what it's like to be in their world. Every group has strengths and challenges, and we judge the others. And how do we separate that mental model so that we can be able to meet people where they're at? Okay. Last one I want to talk about in this one, worldview, local, where's your community, who's helping you survive for those in poverty, middle class, national view, think of our news sources and our awareness centered around that. With wealth, international view, it gets much bigger. Okay, if you want to move to the next slide, thank you, Molly. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at that chart and you have access to it. And if you printed it out, that's great. If you don't, just make an assessment. You can do this later. But I want you to do a self-assessment, just like I had to do. What do you or your family believe? But then also think about, where's your institution and where's your community? So I'll give you like a minute to be able to assess and to reflect on everything I just threw at you. Okay, I'll stop talking so you can think. After you're done assessing, and you can keep going if you would like, anybody want to share, much like Barbara and Safia did, anybody want to share how these hidden rules are represented either in your community, your workplace, or with yourself? Share what you're comfortable sharing, but how do you apply this to your world? Thank you for those of you that are adding to the chat. Networking is important to open up lines to more resources. It is establishing those relationships. Wonderful, Mallory. Speaking in a different way. That's good. We will talk more about language next week. Barbara also says, my language may be unacceptable in a middle-class setting. To come out of poverty, you have to speak the language of the class. Wonderful example. Interesting. Emphasis on faith instead of destiny. And look at the words you use and how does that connect or divide you? Yeah, good one. Yeah. Different resources for different financial issues. So true. Yeah, good middle class comment, Melissa. Get a good job is important so you can support yourself in your old age, right? We're thinking for the future. And the code switching, yeah, we'll come back to that code switching next week. And Safia, good about your comment and pushing back. And I invite people to push back. Yes, definitely. People that are wealthy need to know how to listen. They choose not to understand. And from your lens, that very well may be the truth. And then are there some wealthy people out there that are able to listen and to reach out? But yeah, we do run into that. Yeah, family belief. You have choices, and those choices have consequences, not just for yourself, but others around you. Take that comment from Belinda, translate that to each of the different socioeconomic classes. So, what does family mean to those in poverty? Well, that's my survival. How many of you have heard of somebody in poverty, generational poverty, and they're like, you're going to go to school and you're going to make something of yourself. And then the kid goes to college and is doing well, got some financial aid, hanging in there, doing great. But then the family's like, well, but you can't, you have to pick up your little sister from school. You can't take a class at that time, right? So we want that, but then you are behaving in a way that's differently than what we're used to, and we need all those family members to survive. It's the crab pot concept, right? The crabs are trying to get out of the pot, and the other crabs are pulling them back in. So I want you to succeed, but I don't know. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, what, you too good for us now? And it is that you are loyal to your family. And so even though the family is telling the kid to better themselves, go to school, get a job, you still need to walk that line between taking care of your family and taking care of your goals. And I find that in the academic world, a struggle with some kids. And how do we wrap services around them so they can survive and they can do both? Or the curriculum says that in order to achieve, you have to release yourself from some of those relationships, at least for a short period of time. And I saw my dad do that. I had shared that he went into the military, and that's what helped him get out of poverty. And he needed to stop sending money home to his family so that he could be able to provide for his growing family and be able to, because if he was dividing that income between him and everybody else, he wasn't going to succeed. And that was heart-wrenching for him because he wanted to care for his family he had when he was growing up, but then he needed to take a stand and say no. And that's hard. That's hard. Think about what family beliefs mean to middle class. And it is, I'm going to work hard and provide for you. I may not spend as much time with you because I'm at work, and we celebrate that and think that's wonderful. And then we pitch family values. But what does family values mean in each one, which is really interesting to me. And then for wealth mentality, think about what family values mean. And it is very much, you don't go against the family. The family is your survival, and it is your inheritance and all that. And so you sacrifice your individuality for the family persona or name. So yeah, great comment. Great comment. Ah, good comment, Sherry, that backs that up. Sherry writes, I advise someone to take the dental assistant job, and her mother told her to stick with waitressing so she has money each day from tips, because we need money in hand. We can't wait for your paycheck every month. We need money in hand, tyranny the moment. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so the last slide is, I believe it's the last slide. Yes, is my contact information. That's my personal cell phone number. If you need to text me or reach out to me, if you have any questions, please reach out. This is a lot of information and hard information. So if you want to have a conversation, I invite you to reach out to me through my website or text me or give me a call and let me know what you need. But I will formally end it now and open it up to questions or comments. What do you think? How are you doing? Ah, good. Yes, thanks, Belinda. Good comment. Language is important. Slang and broken English have no place in this household because in a time of intimidation, you will fall back on what you know. Ah, yeah. And think about the different ways. And so you guys are going to have fun next week when we talk about language. Think about if you hire somebody that comes from poverty and they use casual language in the workplace, they're hysterical and it's so funny and their jokes are great, but now we have to call HR, right? It's a different way of being. There's different hidden rules for each one. Yeah. And so I have seen that happen where people will change their language in the home so that they're ready for a workplace or a different organization or whatever. Like that's not allowed here. Interesting comment. Good. Other comments? As you're thinking of comments or questions, I do want to encourage you to apply this information. It's one thing to hear it in a webinar and thank you for being here. It's another thing to apply it and to wrestle with it personally and in your workplace. And the constructs tool is a great tool to assess and to move forward. We'll talk, Felicia, great, about how do you apply this in the next class next week. First is awareness, and that's a lot of what I do with this class. Next is how do you share this awareness and how do you get other people to suspend their mental models and meet people where they're at. I was working with, just as an example, I was working with a healthcare group. No, it wasn't a healthcare group. That was a different conversation. But it was with people that work with parents and parents in poverty, and they had intake forms. Because that's a very middle class thing to do, right? You come in and you're like, okay, name, date of birth, right? And we have our intake forms. And what they did as an organization is they realized that establishing trust and relationships far more important than our forms. Now, we know that here, but what do is that in middle class, we're very much organized, right? And thinking for the future, we need to capture this data so we can do something later, right? So they're very form heavy. So what they did is they set the forms aside and they said, welcome. And they had a conversation and they established that trust and they built a relationship. And we'll talk more about this next class. But look at how they got 90% of what they were going to ask him anyway by listening. That was huge. And how you connect with people who have those hidden rules of poverty, mental models around relationships, of being in poverty, right? I'm a resource for you. So let's have a conversation. They would get all done with their intake process. Then they go, you know what, let me just make sure I have everything I need. Got your name, got where you live, got how many people in your house, got your food habits, right? All from a conversation. Oh yeah, can you tell me your date of birth? That didn't come up on our conversation. Let me capture that now, right? So they did the same thing, but they flipped their model. So if you want to apply this, how do you look at some of those processes you have from a lens of being in poverty rather than a lens of being in middle class? Now, can you do both? This organization figured out how to do both. But what was their priority? What did they want long term? They wanted to establish that relationship and that trust so these parents would come back to them and they could keep helping them. But when you come in all middle class with your intake form and you're like, okay, and I do this. How many of you have been to it? I left my primary care physician because this happened to me. Maybe you go to a doctor's office and you're like, oh, I'm really worried about this issue. Okay, we're going to talk about that, in half an hour after you sit in their waiting room. And then, can you see the judgment on my face? And you answer all their questions. And, oh, now they don't even have paper. They're doing it on a tablet like this. Yeah. And what about your medical history with your family? Right? And it's all about them. It's not really about me until 30 minutes later. They're like, okay, what rushed you in today? And then the doctor came in, saw me for 2 minutes, listened to the first half of what I was worried about, and then quick prescribed something and then left. And I was like, nope. So then I found a physical or a primary care physician that would listen to me. That was huge. That was great. And our relationship much better. And I'm able to talk freer because I feel like I'm being heard. So that's just a sample of what we're going to talk about next week as far as application. Suspend your mental model so that you can meet people where they're at. What do they need? Tara, I really like your comment. It's a struggle in your agency working to address how to be more personable with relationship building and still gather the data necessary. Wonderful comment. I know that a lot of agencies are wrestling with that because we do need to capture the data, right? Because we do need that for funding models and to justify our existence and all of those great things. But how can you have two people in the room? One that's going to listen, one that's going to take note. I would expand and be creative about what's going on. But that can be a challenge. It's a good staff meeting conversation. Other comments, other questions? Thank you, Safia, for the books in the chat. Another one I recommended last week is Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. The Netflix show was okay. The book is great, and it really walks through somebody moving from poverty and the challenges. Other questions? Comments? Thank you, Mallory.
Okay, well, if that is finishing up our questions, then I would like to thank everyone so much for coming today. As stated earlier, we do have a follow-up survey for you to complete, which I am going to put into the chat right now. And then this will also be sent to you via email to complete. Thanks so much for filling it out. It helps with our future webinars. And we'll see you next week for part 3 of the series. And we're just really grateful for you coming. So have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next week.
Wonderful. I'll hang on just another minute if anybody has anything else. Other than that, thank you for being here and thank you for taking this information in. Bye-bye. Molly, I think we're good.
All right, we will see you later. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.